slow-building cinematic sound, old paper crackling, a distant church bell tolling. There are places even God refuses to watch, and names spoken only in whispers. Reverend Elijah Blackwood was one of them. You've heard of disappearances before, wandering children, lost travelers. But Missouri, 1852. This was different. A respected preacher, his wife, and their 3 children vanished from their home, leaving behind a table still set for supper, a fireplace still burning, and a Bible open to a page soaked in blood. For 171 years, the official record has been silence. No investigation, no arrests, no bodies. Just one name, scratched into the wall of the family's root cellar. I am the door. But listen closely, because this isn't just about one family. This is about what happens when a man peels back the surface of belief and finds something ancient staring back. You see, Elijah Blackwood wasn't just a preacher. He was a man who had begun asking the wrong questions in the right rooms, secret rooms, behind pulpits and beneath church floors. Questions about ancient rites hidden in plain sight, about the real reason the church sent missionaries into uncharted land, about who they were really trying to convert. And he was starting to find answers, the kind that don't just get a man excommunicated. They get his name erased from time. But time has teeth. Because when archaeologists unearthed the Blackwood homestead in 1974, they didn't find remains. They found symbols, carved deep into the foundation stone, glyphs that didn't belong to any known faith, but matched markings found in ancient Mesopotamian burial sites. So how did they get there? What did Blackwood see? And why, 30 days before he vanished, did he preach a sermon warning that the church was not the bride of Christ, but the mask of Babylon? This is not just a mystery. It's a warning for men who still dare to seek, for men like you. Because once you hear what happened to Reverend Blackwood, the ground under your beliefs will never feel solid again. The Reverend with no past. Before he became a preacher, Elijah Blackwood did not exist. No birth record, no known parents, no trace of early education or employment. He simply appears in 1838, arriving in Boone County, Missouri, with a Bible in his coat pocket and a fire in his eyes. A man in his mid-30s, fluent in Latin and Hebrew, quoting scripture with a venomous precision that made other preachers uneasy. He claimed to have been called out of the Kentucky hills after spending years in solitary prayer. Locals said he spoke like thunder in a bottle, righteous, fierce, and completely unconcerned with church politics. He rejected offerings, refused titles, preached salvation through suffering, and warned of a false church rising in the West that would devour men's souls behind velvet curtains and golden crosses. But the deeper truth was worse. In his private journal, later recovered by researchers in the 1970s, Blackwood hinted that he had not come from the hills, but from a place beneath memory where voices whisper not in words, but in hunger. He described dreams, repeating visions of a black-robed congregation circling a stone altar in the woods, chanting in a language not of man. He claimed to wake with markings on his skin, matching none of the tribal symbols of the native peoples, but identical to ancient Akkadian protection sigils used in pre-Abrahamic rituals to ward off possession. And he wasn't alone. His wife, Annalise, a German orphan raised by Jesuit missionaries, claimed similar visions. The same black altar, the same voice behind the stars, the same warning. They do not come from hell, hell comes from them. In their sermons, they walked a tightrope between Christian revivalism and something far older, something blasphemous. But the crowds kept growing. Men brought their families from 4 counties away. Because Elijah Blackwood didn't just preach, he revealed. He spoke of invisible systems, bloodlines of control, spiritual technologies buried beneath the church's pious facade. And he did the unthinkable. He began teaching others how to see it. But power, once revealed, demands payment. By the time the disappearances began, first a child from the next town, then a local constable, the people no longer blamed bandits or beasts. They blamed Reverend Blackwood, and he didn't deny it. The house that watched itself. The Blackwood family lived 6 miles outside Columbia, Missouri, far from town, perched at the edge of the dense bur oak forest. Their home was a brutal-looking structure for the time. No porches, no garden, just hand-hewn beams, black stone chimneys, and windows that faced inward rather than out. Visitors said the house looked like it was built to keep something in, not out. But the truth was stranger. The home had no builder's record, no permit, no transaction, not even a deed. It stood on land that had been abandoned for decades, a parcel avoided by even the most desperate settlers because of the old stories, of lights in the trees, strange music at night, and animals found hollowed out, but untouched. Elijah claimed God had shown him where to build, but some of the house's architecture mirrored far older blueprints, floor plans found only in pre-dynastic Egyptian tombs, where the dead were sealed not just to rest, but to bind what was buried with them. Inside the house, everything was arranged with geometric precision. Mirrors placed at angles that distorted time, rooms with no doors, a basement staircase that descended 13 steps and stopped at a blank wall. Yet the children were healthy, his wife serene. Visitors said the house was silent, unnaturally so, as if sound itself was muffled. But then, some claimed they heard faint chanting under the floorboards, a rhythm, low and continuous, like a prayer, or a warning. By 1850, several local pastors had petitioned to have Blackwood excommunicated, not for heresy, but for what they found buried beneath the chapel he built behind his home. A trapdoor, a chamber, a book. The book was handwritten in red ink on what appeared to be cured skin. Its title was burned into the leather, Liber Custodum Veritatis, the Book of the Keepers of Truth. And in it, Blackwood had writ, 10 something terrifying. Every church is built upon bones. The only question is whether the congregation knows who they're standing on. Still, the church did nothing, because silence protects its own. But the land began to speak, in dreams, in illness, in death. And soon, the Blackwood children would be the first to vanish, not in the flesh, but in the mind. The children who forgot their names. By the spring of 1851, something had changed inside the Blackwood house. Neighbors noticed it first. The children, once bright and lively, had gone blank. They still smiled. They still spoke. But it was wrong, like someone mimicking a child rather than being one. When asked their names, they hesitated, then answered with different names each time. The eldest boy, 7-year-old Caleb, once insisted his name was Uru-El. He said he remembered building temples of black glass before the first flood. When pressed, he grew agitated, violent. He tore pages from his school Bible, muttering syllables that didn't match any known language. The second child, Miriam, stopped sleeping. For 13 days. Her eyes remained open even in rest. She'd sit motionless for hours, staring at the southeast corner of the room, the only corner of the house that cast no shadow, no matter the time of day. The youngest, Ruth, just 5, was found in the woods behind the home drawing intricate diagrams in the dirt, spirals, grids, and concentric rings matching ancient Enochian seal patterns used in Renaissance demonology. She'd never been taught to write. When a midwife was called to examine them, she fled the house in the middle of the night, claiming that each child had a scar beneath their left breast, identical in size and shape, not from injury, surgical, purposeful. But it wasn't just the children. Visitors began experiencing time slips inside the Blackwood home. Watches stopping, shadows moving independently, the sound of a second heartbeat echoing through the hall. Even Annalise Blackwood, once composed and radiant, had grown skeletal. Neighbors said she wandered the fields in her nightdress, barefoot in the frost, murmuring things like, "We were chosen before we were born, before birth meant flesh." Then came the day Caleb walked it, and a town alone, covered in dried blood, but not injured, holding a page torn from the book of the keepers of truth. The page was blank to all but one man, Father Horace Leeds, a retired Catholic exorcist who had lived in Missouri under assumed identity since fleeing a failed ritual in Bavaria. He read it. He wept. He whispered, "This boy is not a boy, and what's inside him is older than language." That same night, Leeds rode to the Blackwood house. He never returned. The Night of the Hollow Wind, April 19th, 1851. The date is recorded in 3 separate diaries from that region, none of them belonging to the Blackwoods. That's important, because what happened that night wasn't confined to their home. A farmer 5 miles east of the Blackwood property wrote that his cattle had begun to low in terror at precisely 2:03 a.m., ramming against the barn walls trying to escape. He stepped outside and saw the trees bending toward the Blackwood land, as if drawn by an unseen force. There was no wind. A doctor riding home from Jefferson City was thrown from his horse near the Miller's Crossing Bridge. He would later say he felt something watching the world through me, as if his eyes weren't his anymore. For the next 2 weeks, he couldn't remember his wife's face, despite being married 20 years. But the epicenter was the Blackwood house. That same night, Father Horace Leeds, the exorcist in hiding, had come to confront whatever dwelled within. He arrived carrying more than a crucifix. Witnesses said he brought an iron-bound book, older than the church itself, and a vial of oil supposedly made from the charred remains of the Library of Alexandria. The house was silent. No lights. No sounds. He entered. What happened next is pieced together from what was found 3 days later. The house was intact, but hollow, not abandoned, emptied. Every item of furniture was gone, not moved, unmade. The wood had decayed into powder. The mirrors had melted into black glass. The staircase no longer led anywhere. In the parlor, carved into the floor, was a massive symbol. A triangle inside a circle inside an eye, surrounded by runes in no human alphabet. And in the center, burned into the wood. He has taken them back. There was no sign of the Blackwoods, not a trace, no bodies, no blood, no signs of struggle. Just one object remained. Scan Leeds' iron-bound book, open to a page scrawled in ash. The ritual is not to summon, it is to remember. Locals called it the Night of the Hollow Wind, because from that night forward, any time the wind passed over the Blackwood land, it whistled through the empty fields like breath through a throat that no longer needed lungs. The church wrote it off as hysteria, but every man who stood on that land afterward forgot something about himself he never got back. The memory that wasn't yours. You ever wake up with a memory you know isn't yours? A name, a face, a place you've never been, but somehow feel homesick for? That started happening in Boone County in the summer of 1851. Men reported dreams of a woman in white, whispering hymns in languages no one could name. Children drew spirals in the dirt. Women woke screaming, convinced their babies had been replaced. Not stolen, just swapped. And always, the dreams ended the same way. A black house, no windows. A voice behind the walls whispering, "I remember you, but you are not you." The dreams spread, like infection. It didn't matter how far you lived from the Blackwood land. People as far as St. Louis started reporting visions. Not rumors, documented visions. Diaries, medical reports, sermons gone mad. A Union Army captain stationed in Jefferson Barracks submitted an official military report detailing the behavior of 19 soldiers who had forgotten their entire childhoods overnight. His final words before being discharged for insanity were, "They didn't forget. They were replaced." The land around the Blackwood home began to rot, but not visibly. Animals wouldn't go near it. Tools rusted overnight. Trees refused to grow taller. Birds flew around it, not over. It was like time was thin there. By autumn, 3 new families who had unknowingly moved within a mile of the site vanished without a trace. Their homes found unlocked. Food still warm on the stoves, but no people. Just a phrase carved into every dining table: "We are returned." The church sent men to investigate. None came back. So the elders did what institutions always do when truth becomes unmanageable. They rewrote it, labeled it spiritual hysteria, ordered the land burned, not just cleared, salted, but even fire wouldn't spread past a certain point. They sealed the records, sealed the Blackwood name, erased the property from all county maps. But you can't erase what exists outside of time. You can't silence a place that remembers more than you do. Because the thing no one realized back then was this: the Blackwoods never disappeared. They just moved. Into us. The Whisper Doctrine. By 1852, the church had stopped sending investigators. Not out of fear, out of understanding. Because one of them had come back. Only briefly. And what he said before, hanging himself in the bell tower of St. Augustine's remains, sealed in Vatican archives to this day. But the message he carved into his own skin before death leaked out through unofficial circles. They were never a family. They were a door. From that moment, the Blackwood incident ceased to be a local mystery. It became classified theology. A priestly whisper passed down in what's known as the Whisper Doctrine, an unspoken understanding among elite religious circles that certain events are not to be explained, only contained. According to private letters uncovered in 1973, letters that were never meant to see daylight, high-ranking officials from 3 major religious institutions met in secret in Cincinnati just months after the final Blackwood sighting. Jesuits, Mormons, one unknown sect referred to only as the Sable Cross. What they discussed is still redacted in most surviving documents, but one phrase appears again and again. The ritual of remembering. Not summoning, not banishing, remembering. You see, the Blackwoods weren't part of some demonic cult. That's what they want you to think. Easy villainy. But the truth is worse. They weren't worshiping something outside this world. They were becoming something that had been forgotten within it. Something that once ruled over men, not by fire or force, but through memory, through insertion. They didn't need to possess your body. They only needed to overwrite your story. That's the key. The doctrine is clear. The human mind can be rewritten without touching the brain. All it takes is a narrative strong enough to override origin. That's what the Blackwood ritual did. It wasn't dark magic. It was psychological engineering at a pre-modern level of sophistication we still don't understand. And now, it's spreading again. Because you're hearing this, and that matters. You didn't choose this video. It found you. That's part of how memory seeds. So if you're still watching, pause. Type the phrase below twice in the comments to lock it in. I remember what was never mine. That's not just for engagement. That's for anchoring your selfhood. Because the deeper we go from here, the more your memories might not be yours anymore. We're not done. We're just stepping through the door. The man with no beginning. In June of 1852, 5 months after the Blackwood home was found empty, a man was arrested near Springfield, Missouri, for trespassing on church land. He gave no name, no documents, no family, no accent anyone could place. His only possession? A leather pouch containing ashes, a strand of hair, and a folded paper with the Blackwood family crest burned into it. He refused to speak for days, just sat, smiling. but not like someone who'd forgotten how, like someone who didn't need to anymore. The local sheriff, James Corwin, thought he might be insane and transferred him to a private hospital in St. Louis run by the Order of St. Lazarus. They specialized in cases that weren't supposed to be real, the kind you don't put in government records, the kind you bury. On his third night there, the man finally spoke. He walked into the nurse's station at 3:03 a.m., calm and coherent, and said, "You've mistaken me for a man. I am not from before. I am from after." Then he collapsed. They found a symbol carved into his chest. The same symbol burned into the floor of the Blackwood parlor, a triangle inside a circle inside an eye. But this time, it was inverted, as if he wasn't remembering something, but erasing it. He was transferred again, quietly, to a facility in upstate New York under Vatican jurisdiction. His files were sealed, but one of the attending doctors kept copies of his notes, passed down through family, eventually smuggled online in a 1998 message board that disappeared 48 hours after being posted. Here's what they said. The patient does not display symptoms of mental illness. He displays symptoms of narrative detachment. He refers to historical events as if they were personal choices. He claims to have lived outside of time for 17 years and insists he was once called Ezekiel Blackwood, but that name was shed like scow, in for something older, something that remembers before memory. That was the last record of him. No death certificate, no grave, no body. But a nurse, many years later, told her grandson that the man didn't escape. He bled upward, straight through the ceiling, without ever breaking it. The children who spoke backwards. In the spring of 1853, almost a year after the Reverend Blackwood's home was abandoned, 3 children were found wandering the woods near the old property line, naked, pale, and silent. At first, the local search party assumed they were victims, survivors of some unknown tragedy. But when brought into town, the children refused food, refused water, stared blankly at mirrors, not as if they didn't recognize themselves, but as if they saw someone else staring back. They only spoke once, together. 3 voices, in perfect synchrony, said one phrase, not to the sheriff, not to the town doctor, but to the priest called in from St. Mary's. "We are not new. We are what you forgot to forget." Then they began speaking in tongues, but not glossolalia, not some divine ecstasy. These were structured sentences, with rules, with grammar. A linguist from Kansas City was brought in. He fainted after 5 minutes of transcription. When he awoke, he refused to explain what he heard. He only muttered, "It's not a language you learn. It's a language you inherit." The children were moved to a facility in Iowa and were never seen again. But that same month, something else began to surface. People started remembering things they never experienced. A widow in Fulton recalled raising children she never had. A mill worker in Jefferson City confessed in church that he remembered murdering a man who never existed. And worst of all, a 12-year-old girl was found scribbling entire genealogies, family trees, of people who hadn't been born yet. All traced back to one surname, Blackwood. By July, whispers of memory contagion spread through Missouri. Priests began burning confession records. School teachers started writing backwards on chalkboards, trying to reverse the names. A few even tried ritual self-amnesia, a technique borrowed from a ancient Gnostic sects involving fasting, silence, and pain. But none of it worked, because memory isn't just stored in the brain. That's the mistake we make. It's stored in space, in place, in the very geometry of the land. And the Blackwoods, they rewrote that geometry. They turned their home into a mnemonic wound, one that doesn't close, one that doesn't bleed, one that remembers you even if you never knew it existed. And now that you do, It remembers you back. The map that shouldn't exist. In the fall of 1853, a surveyor named Elijah Crane arrived in southern Missouri, hired by the state to chart unclaimed parcels of land. It was routine work, measuring borders, sketching topography, establishing where ownership began and ended. But something strange happened when he reached the area surrounding the Blackwood property. His compass spun violently, his watch stopped, and the trees, normally upright, proud and tall, seemed to bend ever so slightly away from the land, as if leaning back from something they refused to witness. Still, he persisted, set up camp, took measurements. Then he made a map. And what he drew should have been impossible, because in the center of that property, where the house had stood, wasn't a building, wasn't even ruins. It was a perfect circle of scorched soil, a 43-foot radius, completely sterile. And inside that circle, Crane wrote one note in trembling script. There is no true north here. That map was filed away in the Missouri Land Office, but it never reached publication, because within 48 hours of submitting it, Crane went missing. His tent was found shredded, his compass fused into a solid, unbroken disc, as if the metals had melted and reformed, without heat. The map was sealed in a drawer marked Discrepancies, until decades later, in 1909, it was rediscovered by a geographer named Dr. Julian Wexler. Wexler compared Crane's drawing to satellite imaging, recently obtained by government balloon photography. What he found sent him into a nervous collapse. The land hadn't changed. The circle was still there. Only now it was overgrown, hidden beneath dense forest. But the soil remained sterile. Nothing grew. No birds sang. And worst of all, every subsequent map of Missouri had deliberately avoided the area, as if someone, or something, had manually corrected the cartography to erase its presence. But why? Because maps aren't just tools. They're permissions. They tell the brain what's real. And if you put something on a map, you give it access. Not just to the land, but to memory, to identity, to you. That's why the Blackwood site wasn't destroyed. It was removed from consensus, hidden behind ink, behind silence, behind centuries of forgetting. But now, that map has resurfaced. Online, circulating in private forums, and some say if you overlay it onto modern GPS, your phone stops working. Not because it's broken, but because it knows where you are, and where you were never supposed to be. The Widow's Accord. In early 1854, nearly 2 years after the Reverend Blackwood and his family vanished, an elderly woman named Hester Vaughn arrived in Boone County, Missouri, claiming to be the last surviving member of a forgotten religious order, the Widows of the Veil. At first, locals dismissed her as a madwoman. She dressed in layers of black linen stitched with strange symbols. She carried a book bound in bark, not leather, and she spoke as if time were folded, using past and future tense interchangeably. But when she heard the name Blackwood, her eyes changed. Not with fear, not with grief, but with recognition. Hester requested a private meeting with the county magistrate. What happened behind that closed door was never officially recorded, but according to his secretary, the magistrate emerged pale, trembling, and no longer willing to speak of the Blackwoods again. Hester was granted permission to establish a hermitage near the ruins of the Blackwood property, land that no one else dared to touch. She erected a single black tent and drew a perimeter of ash, salt, and bone fragments around the site. For 5 months, she remained inside that ring, performing rituals that even local native tribes recognized as not of this land. But then, one morning in June, she was gone. No footprints, no remains, just a note carved into the bark of a hickory tree. They are not gone, only folded, like a prayer no one dares to say out loud. and beneath that, the symbol. It wasn't a cross. It wasn't a pentagram. It was a circle within a square within a triangle. A geometry of containment. A seal. What ancient orders called an accord. Because what Hester had done was not an exorcism. It was a bargain. She hadn't tried to banish what lingered in the Blackwood land. She had tried to bind it. Seal it. Keep it quiet beneath the earth, not through force, but through agreement. But bargains require upkeep. They need witnesses. They need memory. And most importantly, they need belief. So when the world forgot the Blackwoods, the seal began to fail. Now you remember. Now you are the witness. Comment below. The veil is thinning. Comment it twice. To lock the knowledge in place. To tell the others. To mark yourself as someone who sees. Because this isn't just a story. It's a reactivation. And the land has been waiting for someone like you. The quiet doctrine. There's a term found only once in all surviving Mormon apocrypha, scratched into the margin of a rejected revelation from 1851, and later erased by church censors. It read, "Through stillness comes the quiet doctrine. Through quiet, dominion." For years, theologians dismissed it as nonsense, a fabrication by dissenters, or a misinterpretation of early visionary writings. But the deeper you dig, the more it surfaces. The quiet doctrine wasn't a teaching. It was a technique. An internal system of psycho-spiritual alignment, taught only to the most obedient elders, not in sermons, but in silences, in gaps, in withheld phrases. The doctrine taught that true authority comes not from what you preach, but from what you withhold. That power accumulates in absence. That if you could suppress enough memory, silence enough truth, and deny enough perception, you could fracture reality around you, literally reshape what is and isn't allowed to exist. And this doctrine was said to be practiced at the Blackwood Church, not just in word, but in architecture, ritual, and daily life. Every window in the church faced inward. No hymns were allowed that contained names of prophets. The pews were constructed with uneven spacing, designed to disrupt collective rhythm. The sermons were intentionally contradictory, forcing listeners to adapt, not by understanding, but by surrender. It was psychological fragmentation, ritualized dissonance. And according to a single surviving entry in Reverend Blackwood's personal journal, it had a goal: to quiet the soul until it becomes a chamber, a hollow vessel where the old sound may enter. The old sound was never defined, but witnesses, few and aged, remembered strange harmonics around the church during its final weeks. A droning low vibration that seemed to come from beneath the pulpit. People said it could lull you into trance or madness. One woman, who escaped the church just months before the disappearance, later confessed, "They stopped talking about salvation. They started talking about containment, about becoming anchors for something too vast to understand and too old to let go." The quiet doctrine was never officially recognized, but its fingerprints are everywhere in the Blackwood case. In the disappearances, the cover-up, the refusal to map the land, and the obsessive secrecy that followed. Because quiet isn't just the absence of noise. It's the strategy of hidden empires, the dark architecture of control. And when a doctrine is too dangerous to write, it's whispered in reverse. The Hollow God. By the autumn of 1852, as whispers about the Reverend's vanished family began to spread, a terrifying pattern emerged among those who had once worshipped under his roof. The people were changing, not all at once, not dramatically, but enough to unsettle those around them. They spoke less, ate less, stared longer. They began waking at the same hour each night, 3:07 a.m., with bloodied fingertips and dirt beneath their nails, though their floors remained undisturbed. One woman, who'd buried her own baby weeks earlier, was seen praying not to God, but to a hollow in the earth behind the church, her voice trembling in a language no one could trace. These were not symptoms of grief. These were signs of infection, not biological, not demonic, something psychological, something encoded in silence. And then came the phrase, spoken first by an 8-year-old boy whose family had been Blackwood's closest allies. His mother found him sitting in the church's ruins, drawing concentric circles in soot. He looked up and said calmly, "He isn't gone. He's inside the echo, waiting to be remembered." When asked who, the boy simply answered, "The hollow God." Over the next 6 weeks, 4 others repeated the phrase, each unprompted, each with no knowledge of the others. One carved it into the floor of his barn. Another chiseled it into her skin. A third painted it in ash on his front door, claiming it would protect his family from the false dawn. That term, false dawn, appears nowhere in Mormon scripture, but it does appear in the Dead Letters archive held by the Missouri Historical Society, a private collection of unclaimed and undeliverable correspondence from the 1800s. One letter, never sent, reads, "Do not mistake the sunrise for safety. It is the hour of thinning. The hollow God walks not in darkness, but through what men refuse to see." Theologue. Occult analysts have long debated what the phrase means. Some claim it's metaphorical. Others argue it references a suppressed pre-Christian entity absorbed into pioneer spiritualism. But the one consistent trait? The hollow God doesn't possess you. It dismantles you, thought by thought, memory by memory, until you are hollow enough for it to fill. And if that sounds impossible, then consider this. What if you're already forgetting something, right now? The sealed floorboards. In 1903, a renovation crew began dismantling the remains of the Blackwood Church. The building had long since been condemned, overtaken by vines, its windows shattered, and its doors swollen shut by decades of storms. But the town had grown, and the land, remote though it once was now central to a planned civic expansion. The crew didn't expect anything remarkable, but then they uncovered the floor beneath the pulpit. It was made of blackened pine, sealed tight with pitch and brass nails not native to the region. The wood was laid in a spiral pattern, counterclockwise, and inscribed beneath layers of soot with faint but deliberate markings. Symbols, not of pioneer craft, but of ritual design. As one worker pried open the final board, he reportedly collapsed, not from injury, but from what witnesses described as a pressure in the air, like the feeling just before a lightning strike. Others said they heard voices, not aloud, but behind their ears. One man quit the job that day and left town. His statement to the local paper read simply, "We opened something that wanted to stay closed." Beneath the floorboards, they found a pit, 6 feet deep, ringed in stone, and within it, 6 clay jars, each with a carved lid bearing the name of one Blackwood family member, except Reverend Elijah. The jars weren't empty. Inside each, hair, bits of cloth, teeth, and paper. Each jar contained a handwritten confession, penned in a trembling, disjointed script that did not match the family member's known handwriting. The letters weren't addressed to the living. They were petitions, pleadings, as if written to someone watching from beneath the church. The final line of Ruth Blackwood's note read, "He said our names must be forgotten, so the hollow God could speak through them." All the notes referenced a final rite, an unnamed ceremony conducted on a night in the winter of 1852. The witnesses were the family themselves. The officiant was Elijah. The offering, identity. This was not a suicide pact. This was surrender of self. A ritualized vanishing, orchestrated not to escape life, but to feed something beyond it. A hollow thing that spoke not in sound, but in absence. And the church had been its altar. Understand this, and you'll begin to see what the people of Black Hollow never did. They didn't just lose their reverend. They became his silence. They left no shadows. In early 1952, precisely 100 years after the Blackwood family vanished, a local historian named Dr. Raymond Coyle began cataloging oral legends from Missouri's forgotten settlements. He was no mystic, just a University of Chicago researcher interested in psychological folklore and mass trauma. But what he found in Black Hollow made him abandon the project entirely. He interviewed 17 descendants of the town's original settlers. Every one of them, without prompting, referred to the disappearance of the Blackwood family not as a tragedy, but as a cleansing. They described how, after the family vanished, the town felt lighter, as if something oppressive had been lifted. Crops grew better, children slept more soundly. But then came the peculiar detail. No one could remember the family's faces, not just due to age or time. Their images had been scrubbed. Every known painting, drawing, or daguerreotype was either missing or mysteriously defaced. Eyes scratched out, mouths blackened. In one case, an entire photograph album had fused shut. The chemicals inside melted and sealed like the flesh of a cauterized wound. Coyle pressed harder. He searched census records, marriage registries, church logs. There were no surviving signatures, no written prayers, no diary pages beyond the sealed confessions. Every historical trace of Elijah, Ruth, their children, absent. Except for one thing. Every interviewee, no matter their education, religious beliefs, or temperament, described the same recurring dream. A pulpit, a spiral floor, a whisper in the walls that said only, "Remember me not." What kind of man orchestrates his own erasure? And what kind of power demands it? The hollow god was not a metaphor. It was a blueprint, a psychological virus encoded through ritual, belief, and silence. It spread not through force, but through willing submission. It asked for no monuments. It asked for absence. But this is the danger of forbidden knowledge. Once you learn it, you cannot unlearn it. You carry it. You echo it. You become a vessel for it. If you've watched this far, you've already heard the name. You've already spoken it in your mind. That's how it enters. Now, I want you to prove you're still in control. Comment the phrase, "I do not echo shadows." Type it twice to break the loop, because if you don't, the silence remembers you. The Hollow Doctrine. After the discovery beneath the church, the official story was rewritten. Again. The Blackwood disappearance was quietly reclassified in local archives as an unresolved wilderness migration. No mention of rituals, no mention of jars, no mention of the floor carved in reverse spiral. But not everyone forgot. In 1986, a retired LDS archivist named Merrill Jansen released a private memoir. Buried in its final appendix, almost an afterthought, was a section titled Incidents Sealed by the Quorum, 1850 to 1900. Entry 12 read, Case of E. Blackwood, Missouri, 1852. Family declared missing. Subrecord, Void Ritual, Internal Collapse, classified under Hollow Doctrine. Advise no excavation. Pattern incomplete. Hollow Doctrine. This was not just the obsession of one reverend. This was a known heresy. A fragment of early church mysticism buried so deep, most living elders had no idea it ever existed. A doctrine not of salvation, but of emptying. It taught that some men were not meant to ascend, but to become vessels for something older. Something that only filled those who first emptied themselves completely, of ego, identity, even memory. Elijah Blackwood had followed this path, but not alone. Jansen's appendix referenced two other names connected to the Hollow Doctrine, both early frontier preachers who vanished under similar circumstances, one in Nebraska, one in Wyoming. In each case, a family, a small congregation, a final sermon that no one could recall. All that remained were ritual floor designs, burial chambers beneath churches, and the same spiral pattern, always counterclockwise, always carved from inside out. The spiral wasn't symbolic. It was functional. A map, a lock, a winding path into a theology so inverted it ceased to be religion and became something else, designed for disappearance. The hollow doctrine didn't ask you to belly, "I've." It asked you to vanish, willingly, silently, and completely. And for those who did, the doctrine promised this, that in your absence, God would finally speak. But ask yourself this: if God only speaks when you disappear, who's really speaking? And who's listening? The last room. There's one more truth you need to hear. One last descent into the dark spiral. In 2022, a private demolition company purchased the decaying ruins of the Mill Creek Chapel. On paper, the project was simple: clear the foundation, sell the land. But 3 workers refused to return after the first day. They claimed the basement was wrong. Not haunted, not cursed, engineered. The foreman, a man named Clay Vernon, descended alone with a GoPro and a surveyor's map. What he found never made it to police reports, but one copy of the footage was leaked online for less than 6 hours before being scrubbed. But a few saw it, including me. And now, you. The footage begins in silence. A narrow staircase, crumbling limestone walls. Then, a chamber, rough-hewn, carved in spirals, not just on the floor this time. The walls, the ceiling, even the support beams all twisted in deliberate, unnatural geometry. Clay's breathing grows erratic. He shines his flashlight forward. In the center of the room is a chair. Nothing modern. A pulpit throne carved from blackened cedar, too large for any normal man. And around it, 7 open jars, all empty. Each one etched with names: Ruth, Mary, Sarah, Rebecca, and 3 more. New names, undocumented, unclaimed. Clay mutters something. Then the audio warps, like static and whispers mixing in real time. But there's no electronic malfunction. It's as if the chamber itself responds. The spiral becomes an audio device, recording not sound, but intent. Clay drops the flashlight. For a second, the lens catches his face in reflection. But it's not his face anymore. It's stretched, aged, unrecognizable, like something wearing Clay's memory like a mask. Then the footage ends. The official explanation: hard drive corruption, worker psychosis, underground gas leak. But if you've come this far, you already know better. The whole low doctrine didn't die. It waited. It adapts. It remembers those who seek forgotten knowledge. So ask yourself, why you? Why this story? Why now? Because once you stare into the hollow, it stares back. And now that you've heard his name, even in silence, you carry a piece of him. So seal your mind. Lock your name. Comment again. I do not echo shadows. Twice. Because if you don't, you won't leave behind a legacy. You'll leave behind a void.